I think sometimes what's inside is so scary, because of past traumas, perhaps, because of internal conflicts between what we know and what we see. I don't think I didn't have the courage to be as outspoken as a lot of people who go into the field. The last two issues, one was on gay male, and the other was on lesbians. And man, the stuff hit the fan on those. And I thought, wait a minute, that's not right. It really capsulized my experience in counseling, but in writing the book, is realizing that we can come out on the other side stronger and more resilient, to use that term.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much for joining me today at We Are Mentally United podcast. I really appreciate you coming in today.
Good morning, Z. Good to see you again. Thank you.
Of course, I remember we met at a local church here in Denver, Colorado, and it was really nice meeting you. And the energy that you had was just really positive. So I really appreciate you coming in today. In terms of for folks who might not be familiar with you or your work, can you talk a little bit about yourself and the journey that you have been on?
Sure. I'm a preacher's kid. That's a PK. Um, I was born in Illinois to my dad and my mom. Dad was just finishing seminary, so I got my start in the North, but they were from Arkansas. So after graduation, we moved back to Arkansas, and I spent the first 4 years of my life there. Um, he was serving churches southeast of Little Rock, and then anyway, um, so I'm a preacher's kid. I grew up listening to my dad, usually from the back pew. I tried to sleep, during church. I was really young, and so I grew up listening to the singing and praying, and that went along. And I didn't understand my dad's sermons, but I heard the positivity and the optimism that came through his preaching. Um, and so I got a really good feeling ground, I guess, in faith from that way. Um,
How was that as an experience growing up, like being surrounded by the community of faith and in church?
I think it was my feelings and my memory about it are all positive. Um, being a PK, there were lots of people always around, um, to to say hi, and I imagine I was held by other people. Um, that's the way, at least that's the way it was when I was growing up. Um, so I think it was a pretty positive experience.
That's amazing. I feel like communities play a big role in our upbringings,
I
and
do.
they really impact our mental wellness in a lot of different ways. Just being surrounded by people that have similar ideas as yourself, similar beliefs as yourself, I think that's a really powerful experience,
Yeah,
especially as a kid.
right. I started getting asthma when I was at 10 months old. And so that was an early experience. I think I may have even had a near-death experience with one of the asthma attacks. I write in the book that I remember vividly an image of the nebulizer, I guess, that they were trying to help me breathe with, just kind of burnt into my memory. Um, just an image of it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and so by the time I was 4, my dad and mom had decided, you know what, I think we need to have the doctor suggested we needed a different atmosphere. So my dad put in for Nebraska and Arizona to move there. Nebraska came through first, so we ended up in Bayard, Nebraska, western Nebraska, when I was 4 years of 4 years of age.
Yeah.
Um,
How different was it culturally and environmentally, both the states? Did you feel any difference?
well, at that age, I don't have much of a feeling of difference there. Um, we arrived in 1950 and started. and we're listening to the stories of the blizzard of 49. Apparently, that was a huge, huge storm, and we missed it. I'm glad because the stories we heard were really quite sobering. But we didn't experience another snow like that until, or some, I don't think it was ever quite so similar, but until we moved to Ainsworth, which was when I was in high school, and that we had a snow then. But so that was the church was well, I don't know. It was I don't know that it was a lot different because I remember going to Sunday school every Sunday, of course, and we would sing. This was back in the days when there would be all the kids would get together and we'd sing things like Fairest Lord Jesus and all that. That made a positive impression on me. On it,
Mm-hmm.
it's still my theology's changed quite a bit from then, but it's still a comforting song.
And you've written a very powerful and very empowering book called A Boy Survives, and it's about a journey through polio with hope, self-discovery, healing, and resilience. And you've mentioned in it that polio was something that you had at the age of 2.5 years in Arkansas.
Yep.
Um, do you have memories around that period? How difficult was
Thank
that?
you. Thank you for asking because that's really the key. I guess the key in many ways, certainly the core of my book was the experience of polio at age 2 years and 5 months, I guess it was. The back cover of the book has a picture of me a week before polio. Um, yeah, that's me a week before polio. And the front cover is me at age 4. And you can kind of see the difference in the facial expression. Um, Polio was as I call it in the book, it was a disaster for a young child. Um, it was disastrous in two ways. Of course, you lose function. I couldn't raise my head. That's what got my parents really concerned. So they took me to the doc, and he said he thought he recognized polio and sent us on to University Hospital in Little Rock. And so I spent a month there, and then I was transferred to Children's Hospital in Little Rock for another 2 months. So that whole experience of being not able to control my body and being out of control in the control of everyone of lots of other people who didn't know me and stuff. That was traumatic. The worst part of the whole thing was the fact that um, the hospitals back then with children never allowed the parents to visit their kids except for 1 hour on Sunday once a week.
Well,
So, and my dad being a minister, he was serving churches 100 miles away. And that was just not possible for him to make it to, well, I think he was probably preaching twice every Sunday, once in the morning at one church and once in the evening at the other church. I suspect, I don't know for sure. It might have been afternoon. Anyway, to see me on a Sunday was not didn't work out. And they told me they tried to get to see me at other times of the week, and they couldn't. So the feeling that I finally got in touch with as I was trying to figure all of this out over a period of decades was the feeling of abandonment, that I had been abandoned. And in some ways, and I write this in the book, that at some point I decided that, well, they weren't coming back for me, so I would just reject them. So if the theories of John Bowlby um, were really helpful in helping me to realize that I had detached from my parents, and by thinking that I rejected them, that was one small tiny way of trying to have a bit of control over something that I really had no control over. I didn't have any control over the hospital. I didn't actually have any control over the process of detachment. And attachment was one of the keys to unraveling uh, the puzzles of that puzzle of my life. I was visiting with a pastoral counselor once at a meeting that my wife, who's also a minister, was attending, and he mentioned to me. He says, after hearing my story, he says, "You might have some attachment issues." And I said, "What's that?" And so I I thought, well, I guess I better read up on that. So I got a couple of books and I started reading one of them, and man, I couldn't deal with it. It was too heavy. So I put that aside, put both books aside. And then when I started writing the book, I realized, maybe I better take a look at that. Um, so I pulled out, I discovered the book called In Mindsight by Daniel Siegel, who is a psychiatrist who works with people who have had brain damage and significant other issues in their lives. And he talked about attachment. So I thought, well, I guess I better go back and look at that. So um, so I read that book. That was a really heavy book for me because I tried to take it seriously as I read through it. And he talks about attachment. So I read up on it, and I became aware of this deep, deep, deep feeling of being alone. Um, and so I think that's probably the core feeling that I took from polio, was this feeling of being very alone. So as I decided, as I wrote, I wrote about the two puzzles of my life. One was sexuality, and the other was this extreme loneliness that I felt most of my life. Um, the loneliness I figured out because of the writings of Bowlby and others about attachment. The other was sexuality, and that was triggered by the fact that I had been sexually stimulated as a kid in by someone in one of the hospitals. Probably the second one would be my guess. The words that went with it were, "Here, let me make you feel good." Well, the funny thing is, it felt pretty good. But here's the catch. He said, "You can't tell anyone. And if you do, you can't stay, and your mommy and daddy won't want you." So that right there was the most abusive part of the whole thing, besides just not having parents. So it was a tough, tough time. So, but I survived it.
Yeah, you
Uh,
did. A
when I-
boy survives, as your book title says itself. And I'm sorry for the journey that you had to go through as a child, because I feel like I'm a child therapist myself. I work with children. I see all sorts
Good.
of things happening
Bless your
around
heart.
within the community. And it just sometimes it really breaks my heart just to hear the stories that they're going through, the struggles that they're going through, not by one family member, a couple of different family members, that they're getting violated by. And it's just like, it's extremely heartbreaking. um, and in those moments when you were alone, when you were all by yourself and did not have the support of your family around you, what kept you moving forward? What was that? Was there a positive ray of light? Was there a connection? What kept you moving forward? Because a lot of younger generation, I feel like, struggles with that. They feel like when if they go through one obstacle, it feels like it's the end.
No,
uh,
thank you. I thank you for the question, because I do talk about that in the book too. In that I think, I had 2.5 years, 2 years, 5 months of listening to my parents, listening to my dad, and being in church and stuff. So I think I had a basic sense of that, a basic sense that life was ultimately good, and that I was cared for, not at least by God. Um, and so I think all of that it gave me a grounding of some sort to be able to make it through. Um, the other thing I did also was to pretend. I did a lot of pretending. You want me to be happy? Well, I'll be happy. Um,
mhm.
and I did a lot of that, and it wasn't until I was in seminary that I began to unravel some of it. And part two of the book really goes into a lot more of this stuff. Um, you asked about one of the earliest memory I have, actually, the earliest. I forget what the term is. It's a kind of a sequential memory where you actually have language to deal with it, because 2 years, 5 months, you don't have very much language.
Mhm.
And um, the very first memory I have is of being in a room with a lot of other cribs, and far down at the other end of a long line of cribs, I guess. The image I have was something happening on a stage. My hunch was that it was a Thanksgiving reenactment because I was there over Thanksgiving. It might have been an early Christmas thing, like one of those Christmas pageants. I don't remember anything other than something happening far away that I couldn't see and couldn't participate in. The other thing we learned when I was in second grade was that I was very, very nearsighted. So it's no wonder I couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so anyway, the feeling there was the feeling of being left out. And that has been had was a significant piece of my story for most of my early life.
Yeah,
Of course,
yeah,
being a preacher's kid, that sort of sets up that dynamic anyway. It's sort of like being the kid of a therapist or the kid of a teacher. You know, you're kind of in a different place.
yeah, yeah. No, you're very right because at that age, at that young age, all you need are is social connections. All you need is connections with people, sense of belonging, sense of a deep-rooted connection, or even in some stages, even a superficial connection is some things that kids really crave for, and not having that in that moment must have been really, really difficult.
Well, I had a younger sister. She was 17 months younger, so she would have been probably about a year old, just under a year old when I had polio. I believe that if that is right. No, I don't remember. I don't do the math right now, but anyway, she
No, you're
was,
right. She might be a year old if she's 17 months younger.
yeah. So I was, well, 29 minus 17, I guess. So, um, anyway, she and I were close, and that was a help. Um, my my part of the puzzle issue was mom gave us baths together until I noticed the difference between the two of us. That was the last time we took baths together. That added to the puzzle of sexuality, of course. But anyway, so I had her and and had the kids at Sunday school. Um, and of course, well, another thing I didn't spend a lot of time on this in the book, but in the kindergarten, I had a fever of unknown origin and went to the hospital, had lots of tests, missed half of kindergarten. So I missed out on, I know I had a crush on one of the girls in the kindergarten, and I missed out on that, of course, because I wasn't around. And then, of course, there were neighbor kids. We were in Bayard by now, and the neighbor kids. There were a couple of twins that whose parents ran the bakery in Bayard, and I was friends with them, and we would spend some time together, going or coming back from grade school. So
Mm-hmm.
I was walking well by then, well, as well as could be, and even running to some awkward way. Um, so that was between second and third grade. We moved to Big Springs, Nebraska, which is where I spent third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grades.
Mm-hmm.
There, we played kickball, and I'd run the bases, except I wouldn't run very fast. So every once in a while, my teammates would say, "Here, let me run it for you," and I was okay with that because I knew I wasn't very good. But at least they let me play, and I did. It was kind of fun.
That's good. That's good. Now, having those friendships and having those people around you, especially when you're young, is really important because I see a lot of struggle with kids in social settings when I'm providing therapy services, and um, even 4 years old, 3 years old kids share with me experiences where they feel really left out in the class because kids either make fun of them or nobody
Yeah.
wants to be their friend, and in some situations, they themselves don't initiate that. So having those companionships at all ages, I feel like it's really important. How did your life progress from there onwards? Because what were some of the next things that you did in your life as you became a teenager or
Well, let's see. Um, in fifth and sixth grade in Big Springs, one of the traditions was May baskets. On May 1st, you would share, make a little basket of treats, and you would take it to your friend's house, and you'd leave it on their door and knock on the door, and then they were supposed to try to catch you as you left. And so I did that, and looking back on it, the hope was that you really would get caught and get kissed. But anyway, I said in the book, I think I said I ran a little too fast. But anyway, that was one of the highlights of fifth and sixth grade. Um, and in fifth grade, the music teacher, well, I had a good voice, had a good voice, I guess. I was singing soprano in the grade school chorus. Um, and then in sixth grade, my voice changed. And I went from being a soprano to being a bass. And that was a big disappointment because I enjoyed playing being the soprano. Anyway, that was but then by the time we moved to Ainsworth, I had come to terms with that and started singing in the church choir, and I was in the bass section. So I learned to hear the bass line and then to follow it, and then I can pick it out now easily. So music was an important thing. I started out playing the glockenspiel, snare drums and stuff, and trying to march in the marching band, and that did not go well. But we would make arrangements for me to drop out at some point. I would be on the edge of one of the lines, and I would drop out. Um, and then when I got too tired. So the first marching experiences were with a snare drum bouncing on my leg. That was no fun at all. And then the French horn was what my band teacher said. I think you could be a good French horn player. So he started to me on lessons. Well, I tried marching with the French horn. Well, one of the problems with the horn is number one, the mouthpiece is small, really quite small, and the register that we play in with a horn is such that most of the notes are open fingering anyway. So you bouncing around on your lips, and you miss notes, and it was not fun, not a lot of fun marching. But playing in band, on the other hand, was quite fun. I enjoyed that. And in high school, I was playing second horn, I think, when we played. I think I worked really hard trying to learn triple tonguing, which I still think I can still do. But anyway, it was triple tonguing for we played a band version of Dvorak's New World Symphony, and at the very end is triple tonguing. And I worked and worked and worked on that. I would learn. One of the things I did with the horn was to sit at the piano at home. My parents had started us on taking piano lessons when I was 3. We were in third and fourth grade. Well, yeah, maybe fourth, fifth grade. Anyway, so we had a piano, and I would sit at the piano and practice my horn. Well, I learned the horn pitches as how they would sound on the piano. So now even as I play now, I can visualize the piano keys as to what the C key would be. Horn is keyed in the key of F. Anyway, that's a technical thing we don't need to go into. But anyway,
I
so
can I can see your passion. I can see that raw passion around music, and I
yes,
absolutely love that because I think you have carried that since your teenage years until now.
you mentioned and that's true. And I was thinking earlier today, that music has been important in the fair. I mentioned Fairest Lord Jesus as being a piece that has stuck with me. That was what was a comfort to me when I was a kid. Um, and it's been one of the sources of what's the best word for it, I guess. It helps me look beyond myself, helps me get a perspective of life, of human beings, of being human in the midst of a in the midst of the universe. That's kind of why I chose that picture on the front of the book, of me superimposed over the Milky Way. But for me, that symbolizes the universe. Of course, that's
Hmm.
a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of the universe as we know now. but anyway, so music takes me out of myself, and gives me a new perspective on my being, my existence, and just helps. It is a soothing thing that I just almost I can't really talk about very well because it just helps. Mostly, particularly the music of Brahms. Um, that the Brahms Requiems touches me deeply. Um, some other things. I love
Uh-huh.
Brahms. He wrote a piece. Being given an honorary degree at some university, and so he thought just saying thank you'd be enough, but they didn't think so. So they wanted him to write something for them. So he wrote an overture, um, called Academic Festival. Well, he put to music a lot of drinking songs from the college. And one of the best parts of it is at the very end of it is a smashing rendition of one of those songs. Anyway, I love listening to that thing.
That's beautiful because I completely resonate with you. I feel like music is extremely powerful. It's a very grounding experience for myself as well.
Yes,
Just listening to different beats or just listening to different kinds of
yes,
music, and I feel like it also, I have implemented it in my therapy work with a lot of children and a lot of kids
good.
when I work with them. And a lot of time it just eases your body. It makes your body feel much more light, especially if you're carrying lot of weight or a lot of emotions around
Yes,
yourself. And just singing it out loud, some of the songs for these kids, especially because like they're really young, so they mostly like Disney songs or the ones that are in those animated movies and stuff. So just singing Frozen songs or Lion King songs just makes them express themselves so
yeah,
much.
yes. And another thing is that the there's the reflective side of music, but there's also the bombastic side,
Mm-hmm.
which to me, um, I realized that that symbolizes the victory over difficulties.
Yeah,
I can participate in the victory celebrations of various sorts, and that I can be a part of the winning side, so to speak.
yeah,
That's overstating the image, I suppose, but anyway, the examples of that are Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. The Brahms's First Symphony has stuff like that towards on in the last movement. And John Williams, some of his music does that too.
yeah, yeah. I feel like I was reading a research paper a couple of months ago, and it spoke about how the entire universe functions through frequencies and different music, not just for human beings, but also for animals, also for plants, also for nature. Music and frequency plays a very powerful, uh, is a very powerful tool in their healing.
Yes,
And that was just really mind-boggling to read about it because I had never seen music that way.
that's
Uh,
cool.
and in terms of your own career and stuff, how did your career begin? What did you do as your first professional work? And was advocacy always there in your mind in terms of either raising awareness around sexuality, which you did a lot, or writing up a book? Was that always part of your journey?
Well, let's see. I'll put the advocacy stuff off for just a second. The the I really had a lot of questions as I was growing up, and the part of the introduction to my book is all of those questions. One of my reviewers said, "Oh, so many questions. Oh, does it ever end?" Well, it did. That's the way it felt. It never ended, the questions. Um, but anyway, I gave a sense of that in this introduction. And in high school, I was pretty gifted with science. I became an amateur radio operator, um, and really loved that. That was another way that I found some companionship with some of the people that I would talk with. There was a kid that in Sargent, Nebraska, I guess that was south of Ainsworth somewhere. He said my call letter stood for young dashing screwball. And so I said, oh, okay, well, I'll take that. My call was K0YDS. So anyway, but anyway, the science teachers encouraged me in science. I went to college at Nebraska Wesleyan, which was is a church-related institution. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I started out with science. I was a physics major my freshman year. Then I hit calculus, and calculus was I couldn't make any sense out of it, so I
Me
gave that
too.
up.
Can't do calculus or maths.
I'm embarrassed to say, but one of my thoughts was, why in the world would you want to use math to come up with only an approximation? Isn't math exact? Well,
Mm-hmm.
that was my limitation to math. But anyway, um, so I thought, well, okay, I'm good at music. Maybe I'll be a music major. So I started out in um, let's see, I guess it was music education first, but the first education class was absolutely boring. I just said, oh man, I can't do this. So I thought, well, maybe I'll be a music professional. And then, so that was that my by now I was in the freshman year, I mean sophomore year. And and I thought to myself, man, I don't think I could be in a practice room for 8 hours a day. So I thought, oh man, maybe that's not what I want to do. So I thought, well, I'm now up against the deadline when you've got to say a major
Mm-hmm.
for graduation. So I said, all right, maybe the most important things I know the most important things to me are the big questions, maybe, religion and philosophy. So that's what I declared, even though by then I easily had a music minor. So philosophy and music and religion were my majors, which set me pretty much um, on a road to go to seminary. So I went to seminary in Southern California. The chapel. Oh, one of the important stories in my book is that when my dad let me out and helped me move into the dorm at Nebraska Wesleyan, I, as he drove away, I thought to myself, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. By then I hadn't heard um, Martin Luther King's speech by then. But anyway, so I was done with church. But around Christmas time, the head of the Methodist student movement at Nebraska Wesleyan came to me and he says, we're having this national meeting of Methodist student movement in Lincoln, and I think you might enjoy it. So I signed up and I went. Oh my gosh, I was so inspired that um, I started being active in Methodist student movement and was active in Methodist student movement, MSM. And then because I wasn't just focused on being a Methodist, I was really interested in Christianity itself. So we called ourselves University Christian Movement. So anyway, and that's where some of my advocacy began because I was advocating for a broader view of religion than just denominationalism and stuff like that. I remember um, I remember I was I was a subscriber to Motive magazine, which was a publication of the Methodist Church back then. It wasn't united quite yet. Anyway, and the last two issues, one was on gay male and the other was on lesbians. And man, the stuff hit the fan on those. And I thought, wait a minute, that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
That is just not right. So that was one of the first things that um, one of my first awakenings to the to the need for advocacy. I went to seminary, and there was still this question: what is this sexuality stuff? So I wrote papers. I wrote one on the marriage booklet for simple pastors by Martin Luther. I wrote a book on John Calvin and sexuality. There was a seminar that a bunch of us were in, and I was a part of a small group that wrote a paper on the ethics of extramarital relationships. Um,
Wow.
I wrote the theology section, and it wasn't an exciting piece, and I don't recall that it got a lot of encouragement. But so I wrote a fair amount on sexuality during seminary. And let's see, I was a part of a sexuality education team in the Southern California area. And me and my wife Maggie uh, participated in and led teen sexuality education stuff. We did that also back when I graduated from seminary. We moved back to Nebraska. Uh, my my university, the chaplain at Nebraska Wesleyan had suggested that I go to a seminary that was a different cultural experience than what I grew up with. Well, as you might imagine, Southern California is a very different experience than rural Nebraska. So there was culture shock going out to seminary, and there's culture shock by the time we graduated 6 years later, coming back. So it was quite a deal. Let's see. Yeah,
How challenging was it? How difficult was it to talk about the topic of sexuality at that time and like 50, 60 years ago? It's very much outspoken about now, but I've read books and I've seen lots of difficulties that people used to go through during that time.
yes, yeah. Growing up in my family, sex was not something you were supposed to talk about. I did get the speech at some point in my probably a sophomore year, I suppose, about how important it was to be careful when you're around girls. Of course, I had three younger sisters, so I was around mom and my three sisters all the time. Dad was away at studying and preparing his sermons and stuff. But anyway, I lost my train of thought. Um, let's see, you were asking about advocacy. How did I get into that? Oh, when we came back to Nebraska, I served a church for 3 years in southeast Nebraska. Was a part of the sexuality uh, program in the Nebraska United Methodist Conference. Um, was a part of the planning for uh, sexuality education for young people, and we actually did one for adults. My wife Maggie was one of the co-leaders of one of the adult seminars, and one for senior adults. Um, so let's see. Um,
How
then
how
after one of the things that happened to me when I was in the parish was I did not have a real clear sense of what my limits were. So I was constantly um, going past my limits, and I really ended up really almost being burned out. And so I decided maybe ministry isn't what I was. Maybe parish ministry wasn't what I was set out to be. So I took a leave of absence and did some serious thinking about that. And you know, um, ultimately decided that, well, since my focus has been on sexuality, maybe I should try to do a sexuality ministry. So um, I found uh, well, I didn't find one of the assignments in seminary was it was a sexuality class in Christian faith, and one of the assignments was write a paper, or you can go to a weekend at the National Sex Forum in San Francisco. Well, we decided to take the weekend, and that was our introduction to sexuality as from the point of view of how, let's see, Ted McElvenna was one of the founders of it. And one of the things he writes about is that there was a place to taught to learn about what people do and how they think about it, how they feel about it. So that was kind of the introduction.
it must still have been a really taboo topic at that time because, as you
Yes.
said, your parents would not allow conversations around it as well. Um, did it require like did it require a lot of courage to speak about it, or was this just something that you were just so passionate about that it came across as ease?
Well, a little bit of neither. Um, I don't think I didn't have the courage to be as outspoken as a lot of people who go into the field. Um, I write somewhere in my book that I felt like I had a good intellectual grounding, but I didn't have some of the grounding underneath the emotional maturity or stability, I guess. I'm not sure how to put it, um, to allow me to be um, sure of myself in talking about these things as some other people. So
Mm-hmm.
um, anyway, so Ministry in Human Sexuality was the name of my agency. Um, you
You
remind me a lot about myself when I was doing that because you've set up your own agency for mental health, and I really appreciate that. And
Thank you, thank
I've
you.
been there.
No, I hear that. I read in your book that you mentioned that you consider ministry in human sexuality, the work that you did for it, the most important achievement of your life. Can you speak a little bit more about that work and what you did in that area?
Sure. Um, well, it was a ministry of counseling, education, and advocacy. The counseling, I had taken courses in seminary about pastoral counseling. So I had an approach. In fact, one of my professors wrote a book called Growth Counseling, and so that was my basic point of view, was that helping people to grow into their better relationships and grow personally in who they are. So that was one piece of it. The education was attempting to help people to deal more comfortably with human sexuality. I wrote for the Single Life newspaper in Lincoln, a series of articles on a very wide variety of issues that singles face. I wrote a couple of papers. One of them was called Mixed Orientation Relationships, um, Problems and Possibilities, that sort of thing. It was for building family strengths. Building Family Strengths was an annual, a fairly large symposium on all kinds of issues around families. So that was one of them. I wrote a paper and had a panel of folks who were in mixed orientation marriages. That's where one person is straight and the other person isn't. That's putting it simply. But then I did another one. I was a part of a small group of folks that we did. I think there was a person from Child Guidance Center. There was a person from Planned Parenthood, a person from Disability Advocacy, and me. And then, so we did a workshop on how to help people to become more comfortable with the varieties of sexuality there are, and including disability, and to talk about sexuality and disability as well. So, so let's see. So the counseling, um, I was hoping that that would carry the ministry financially, and then, I gave away a lot. I insisted on a sliding scale. Well, I never really was able to make a living at it, and so that's the main reason why it folded. Because I'm not an entrepreneur. That's one thing I learned. Um,
You
and
also you also wrote in your book that around that time your father also passed away,
yes,
and that also played up a big role in your awakening in terms of moving slightly away from that path.
yeah, yes. My dad's death was reminded me that our time is not infinite when as human beings. Um, and that also was um, so I wrote about how when he died, I guess as I was growing up, I was always trying to help my parents to face whatever it was they were dealing with. And I was never able to really do much with that. In fact, from my mother's point of view, I really messed it up by talking about it with a pastor that I trusted. But that there was nothing I could do to make it better for them, um, and that I um, needed to focus on making my life work. Um, I left MHS. My wife Maggie had found work with Bread for the World, which is a world hunger organization centered in Washington, D.C. And so she started that job, and I was going to close up shop in Lincoln. And I was going to move to join her in Washington, D.C. Well, turns out that a job opening, or one of the other regional organizers positions opened up in Denver. And I found out, and I said, "Hey, let's go west." So we decided. She said, "I can do this job, and I can do it in the west." So we moved to Denver in 1988, and that's how we got here. She worked, I think it was 3 or 4 years for them, and I found a job. I tried to do a pastoral counseling stuff here. That didn't work out well. I finally gave up on that. And then I've in the meantime, I had gone to Kelly services, or at the time, um, I called myself a Kelly girl, and I could type at 69 words a minute at that time. So I was um, they thought I could do a good work with this as a secretarial thing. Well, I found this job with a manufacturing company, typing up price quotations for the various and sundry, um, usually power plants. We made the um, um, company made monitoring systems for pollution um, systems. And anyway, so I was typing up these quotes. Well, they I also was had learned a spreadsheet when I was in MHS, and so they learned I knew spreadsheets. So they said, "Oh, maybe you could do some spreadsheets for us." So that morphed into one of the vice presidents heard about my skill with spreadsheets, and he says, "You know what? My secretary is just making a mess of my engineering spreadsheets. Would you work for me and be my executive assistant?" So I was an executive secretary for a while. Then I heard about a job in the programming department. I thought, well, maybe I could do that. So, my
You're
job,
always curious. You're always curious.
always
You're always trying to
absolutely always
experiment and
curious.
seeing things.
Thank you. Yes, always curious. So, and part of too, I was because I had made a mistake with a client. I was losing my pastoral counseling license and losing my ministerial credentials. So that job as a programmer helped me to focus and to not to catastrophize. That was one of the terms I learned in therapy, not catastrophize the situation. So anyway, I got good at that, and then I became a trainer of that product.
Wow.
Well, then my sister died, as and we had a series of 4 deaths in 4 years at that time. This was by now. Maggie's mom died in 2000. My sister died in 2001. My mom in 2002, and her sister in 2003. So we had a series of 4 deaths in 4 years. My sister's death was a big deal. That was very difficult because um, she and I had been close, but she was a pastoral counselor and was very successful. She was the one of the two founding executive directors of the Samaritan Counseling Center of Hawaii. So that impacted me too, and I decided to leave the work at uh, at the manufacturing company. Then I found there was a job opening at the conference office of the Rocky Mountain Methodist Conference. So I applied for that, and that was my let's see, that'd be about the third career, I suppose. But anyway, so I stayed there for 9 years, doing communication stuff primarily. Um, so that's kind of the bulk of my mixed career, I guess you could say, or
I,
careers.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about all these experiences is that you did not settle, whether that be in college when you were trying to figure out your major. You did not settle with just math or calculus or whatever first came through. And same thing, you did not settle when it came to jobs, because you kept exploring, you were curious about different things, you took a lot of risks. And I feel like that's what makes our life really impactful in a lot of different ways. But because by the end, you have so much of valuable experience of working in different things and doing what
That,
your heart follows.
that's a really good point. The curiosity and that I was always curious about the people I worked with as a therapist. I was really curious about how I could help, which led me to read a lot in terms of personality development and stuff like that. Took classes at the University of Nebraska. One of them was theories of personality development. And excuse me. Um, so that also, and I kept that kind of reading going even after I left the field because I was still curious about what made me tick. Um, what are, what's going on inside myself. Um, and so, I made a list of the therapies that I have experienced that you might be interested in. Let me pick it up here.
Yes, please do share.
I had I have participated in therapy using a transactional analysis approach that helped the two of us in our early marriage to clarify how we were going to relate to each other and get me past operating out of the model that my own family was doing, which was primarily based on passive aggression, and that was not healthy.
It helps break with generational trauma a lot.
Yeah,
Transactional therapy, it really helps break that, those deep rooted things that we carry through generational trauma.
yeah. Unfortunately, that the trauma wasn't so much a part of that work. It was mostly in the relationships. But I did psychodynamic psychotherapy was related to this mistake I made, and that was a very, very helpful, where we remember and reprocess events in the past and connect them to the present was what I got out of that. Then CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, was another one I've participated in, and that taught me to pay more attention to my thoughts and feelings that are causing trouble, and to think about new, different ways of thinking that can help me be help these issues be less troublesome. And then the last one I've also participated in was EMDR, MEMDR.
Mhm.
Anyway, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing,
How is
which is
that?
Well, that is it's a therapy that has been proven to help with trauma, the like veterans have when they come back from war. When there's a specific trauma or series of traumas, it has to do with the way it works with the way the brain works. If it
Eye movement.
applying
It's all
eye
through
movement back
eye
and
movement.
forth, and there's a process involved in it, and it allows you to access the trauma without having to relive it, at least not fully,
Yeah.
enough that you can also apply things that you know and beliefs that you already have that you can apply to those traumas. And it can help them to become less and eventually maybe even not even trauma, so that it becomes, I think one of my therapists called it statistical memory. Instead of the emotional memory, it's more of, yeah, that happened to me and I survived it kind of thing.
No, I've seen that work a lot with veterans. I have read so much research around it, and it's a really powerful tool that a lot of therapists are tapping into. It's one of the things that I also want to get certification in, because it really makes me really curious about the whole process and stuff. How was that for an experience for you? Was it helpful, that therapy experience, the EMDR one?
Yeah, as I recall, it did not last long. It was not as disciplined as I've since learned that it could have been, but it was facing facing part of the sexuality part of the trauma of polio,
Mm-hmm.
and that helped to desensitize some of the emotions around it, and it was helpful. Um,
You.
it was one of the things that all of this therapy has taught me to be is to be more aware of my internal landscape, I guess you could say. What are the feelings, the thoughts that are going on, and then how if they are connected to something in the past, then to say, okay, I survived that, and what did I learn? What have I learned since then? Um, and so it's kind of I guess I suppose I've kind of learned to be a therapist to myself, I suppose you could say. At least I try to use those tools.
100%. I think that's what therapy should be all about. Like, it should empower you and it should equip you with those skills and stuff that you can use in your daily life and not just be dependent on that, on the therapist themselves. I
Yeah.
wanted to also touch with you because this is a really, really heavy and really impactful book that you have written. But what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced while you were writing the book, emotionally or otherwise?
Well, let's see. Um, the thing that got me into it was it was kind of a I guess it was kind of a downtime during late COVID, I guess you could say, 2022. I got to thinking, this life is time limited,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how much more time I've got, but how will I be remembered? Um, and so I got to thinking, well, how do I remember? So I just started. I've been writing stuff all my life. I wrote, I've written English papers, I've written research papers, I've written articles, I've written all kinds of stuff. So I started collecting all that stuff, and I thought, there might be a story here. So and then I was one of the things I did in early in my or late in my pastoral counseling career was an internship at Topeka State Hospital, which is a mental health institution. And one of the things that we were assigned to do was to write a short one-page uh, thing about our lives. And so I had a whole bunch of those. So I put them all together, and I started thinking, now, how can I organize this? So I found an editor. Finding the right editor is an important step, and I
Mm-hmm.
did find the person that had been helping the Rocky Mountain Conference do some of their some of their editing work. Anyway, she agreed to be my editor, and she's the one that encouraged me to not try to put it. I was putting it all in one long format, and I learned that, well, anyways, and she said, why don't you put the basics of your life story in the first part, and then you can go into further detail in the second part. So I ended up with an introduction, the chronology of my life, and then the diving deeper section, and then the very end has an annotated bibliography, which I thought was very important because I mentioned a lot of different things throughout the writing that were helpful to me, and so I would decided to put all those in the back, um, as well as several things that I've written that I thought ought to be helpful. Like one of the things that I wrote was about my faith commitments. Another one was about how I came to deal with my bisexuality, or as I put it now, my attractions to people, regardless of whatever gender they might be. Um, the challenge, the first challenge was, okay, so here's this editor, and she wants it to be this way. So I had to reorganize everything that I'd written up to that point into those two sections, and that was a challenge. Um, Another part of the challenge was trying to remember and document, at least to my satisfaction, the dates and stuff that I was putting on these various and sundry experiences. Um, then somewhere in the sort of towards the middle of the experiences, when I ran across the book by Daniel Siegel, Mindsight, And that's when I started digging into the attachment issue. And that led me into some very depth, very deep places. I went through a period of really, um, oh, how to describe it? Deep despair, crying, heavy duty emotion, dealing with the abandonment, dealing with the detachment and all that I had lost because of all of that. So it was I guess it was some pretty heavy grief work. Um, and if I had been in therapy, formal therapy earlier, perhaps I wouldn't have had to relive it quite like that. But as such, it was still a life-changing experience. I feel more whole now than I have ever felt. More um, more able to say no and be honest with myself. Um, then it came time to be published, and I didn't really take seriously that I would really publish it, but I was I am part of a post-polio support group, and they heard that I was writing and they wanted to read part of it, so I sent it off to a couple of them, and they read them and they said, this ought to be published. So I said, oh, well. So one of the other members of our church actually several members of our church are published authors. This other one had done his autobiography, and I said, "So who'd you use?" So he led me to the author's assistant in Austin, Texas, and she became my second editor because she said, what you've written doesn't really fit either autobiography or a memoir. So I just now call it my autobiographical memoir and let it go at that because it's kind of its own unique thing, I guess.
No,
Um,
I'm so happy that you wrote it. It's like so powerful, and I love the topics and the advocacy work that you have done for marginalized communities back when not a lot of people were taking that risk, not a lot of people were doing that advocacy work, and you did that, or you made your voice be heard through a lot of different votes or through a lot of different conferences that you attended. Because when I work with someone who has a different sexuality or has a different preference and stuff, they have a lot of negative feelings towards the church, towards the faith, because they don't feel accepted enough in that community. And you bringing both of those important really features together, is that's really powerful, because faith is important. You need to have some sort of faith. That's my personal belief. And as well as your identity is also extremely important. You can't tell someone to be a certain way because you believe that that's the way that they should be.
right. Yeah, I think that I have kind of a way of putting things together, I suppose, in a somewhat unique way. I've taken the polio experience, the sexuality experience, the attachment experience, and the religious experience, and putting it together um, is useful for some folks anyway. And I think, just to speak just briefly, I am a Christian, but I'm not the kind of Christian that you hear about on the news. Um, I'm really one that takes the Bible seriously, but not literally, that kind of liberal Christian. Um, and my theology is really is even kind of like people who think of religion as a process, that life is a process, that creation is a process, that the force behind that um, is one we put the label of God to, um, Elohim or Allah, and that force is a good force,
Mm-hmm.
that that it is a force for growth and for healing and for for bringing things together, I guess. Um, so it's a faith that is a broader thing, although it's grounded in, I think Jesus was one of several people throughout history who have been able to have a God consciousness about them
Mm-hmm.
and to communicate that in language that spoke to his time. And that's an important part of. I'm trying to help people to see themselves in a positive way
Hmm.
and to
And
grow.
I think that's really important, and that's really much needed in today's society, but also was very much needed back when 30, 40, 50 years ago. You mentioned something about being grounded. How do you personally stay motivated and grounded while you're doing such impactful work, or while you're having a lot of different struggles that you even went through? How did you keep yourself grounded or motivated?
Well, um, that's a great question. I do find it somewhat challenging. One of the things that I try to do is to notice my internal landscape of what my feelings are, what's driving that, or what is influencing. It's not driving necessarily, but what's influencing that feeling, those feelings. And if I'm feeling overwhelmed, then I need to take some time to be with myself, to reconnect with my inner world, um, and connect to the, the broader perspective of that I get through music. So music and just being quiet are the ways that I kind of recenter or reground myself. Um, I'm not real great with, I don't do daily Bible readings or anything like that. Um, but I do read things that are related to theology and religion and faith um, regularly. So I'm not very disciplined when it comes to that, I guess.
I
Um,
think you feel what comes across naturally to you, and you are connected with your spiritual self and your intuitions, and that's, I feel like, is really important for everyone to be in touch with your own self and what feels right to you.
yeah, I think so because I think sometimes what's inside is so scary, because of past traumas, perhaps, because of internal conflicts between what we know and what we see. Um, that all of that stuff can be very confusing and it can be scary. Um, and to have the patience, it takes patience and courage, I think, to be a part of to be in touch with all of that and to allow it to inform us, but not to control us, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes any sense.
No, it totally does, and I guess that is something that a lot of people feel a little afraid about. Just knowing about those deep triggers of yourself could be a lot challenging.
And I think being a part of a faith community too is important too,
Mhm.
because that helps to ground us in that larger perspective.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It gives you, and it also helps you make up those humanistic connections on regular basis, because I feel like at least today's generation, whether that be the younger ones or the older ones, we are not as connected to one another as we used to be, let's say 30, 40 years ago. Lives have become very much individualistic. In some ways it's good, but in some ways you lose that humanistic one-to-one connection. And I feel like post-COVID, a lot of people have just generally been afraid in terms of going outside and doing those community-based event, and being involved in a church, being involved in your own faith-based community. It does not have to be a religion as per se. Your spirituality could be connecting with nature, could be connecting with the animals, with the birds, with different things around you, and you can find communities within those as well. But it's really powerful, and like at the end of the day, I feel like we are all one, and we
Yes.
have to treat ourselves in that way and not stay so distant away or just in our own little bubble.
Yeah. One of the things that I remind myself is that the God I believe in is a God that likes a diversity. I mean, if you think
Exactly.
about it, if you think one of the things that we often talk about, at least in the Methodist Church, is that we're all made in the image of God. And of
Hmm.
course, that's what Genesis says. And so I think, well, okay, so there's 7 or 8 billion people on this planet, and every one of us is made in the image of God. Wow. Now that is one diverse God.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And a lot of times people focus on much more of the differences rather than the commonalities that bring us and unite us together.
Yes, that's right. And the
Uh,
differences can be so enriching, the perspective of someone who is going through the whole issue of reconciling or changing the way that they identify, even as in a gender kind of way. That's a whole different experience than than most people go through, I guess.
mhm, mhm.
And sexual orientation, who we are attracted to, um, and then how we organize our relationships. Um, what are the organizing principles there?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like we should be welcoming and open to all. In terms of now, what are some of the things that you're working on? How does your day-to-day life or weekly life look like? I know that we met up as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast. Also, we met up at a Dickens Festival,
Yes.
organized by Arvada Methodist Church, and it was a wonderful experience meeting you and connecting up with you there. Do you do more of those gatherings, and like how does your day-to-day life look now?
Well, this morning we went to a pancake breakfast, for a part of the Arvada United Methodist Church Kids Discovery Days uh, program, and it's a daycare. It's kind of a daycare system situation, and the staff and friends of KDD served the pancakes, and so that's why I was a little bit late coming to the interview here. But that's one of the kinds of things we do. I participate in a small group that is mostly a conversational group that we share different parts of our lives with each other. Um, I'm a part of the instrumental. Uh, I'm a part of the instrumental performance group. I play French horn in that. So about once a month we perform in church, and of course involved in that is getting the music and knowing your part well enough that you don't make a fool of yourself as you play. And I go to church every Sunday, or either in person or online. Um, I have served on some of the committees of the church, including what we call as our staff parish relations, which is our human relations book group. Um, and then this last year, I was a delegate to the conference, the United Methodist Conference that we're a part of, which is called Mountain Sky, which includes Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, and one church in Salmon, Idaho. So it's a huge area. But anyway, I was a delegate to that conference that met in Casper. Um, let's see, other things I do with the church are participate in study groups. One of the breakthroughs in my book was that I did was a part of a Bible study in 2010, and we were part of the study was to write something in the style of what we were studying, and at the moment we were studying Lamentations. So I thought to myself, now, what would have been like if I had been able to write a lament about my polio experience? Well, so I set about trying to write a lament. That proved to be a way of reconnecting with the young child that had experienced polio. And that's one of the poems that's in the book. Um, that was one of the major reconnections for me. So Bible studies, studies of social issues. I also am involved in the Western Methodist Justice Movement, which is an organization throughout the whole western half of the U.S. Methodists who are interested in justice, and we were focused on we were focused on sexual orientation in the United Methodist Church because it's been so negative for 52 years up until the last year. It was the first time that we've been free of some of the negative stuff towards homosexuality. But then now we're looking at the justice issues of immigration and in the United States in particular, and trying to figure out how we're going to be a part of the justice for folks who try to come here and have a different life, a new life, and all of the stuff that goes into that. One of the issues there also is the Israel-Palestine issue and what's happening with the Palestinians. Um, my heart just breaks when I look at that. So anyway, that's we watch the news every night. PBS NewsHour. We don't I don't trust Fox and don't like the commercialism of some of the others. So we pretty much stick to PBS.
Yeah, that's really good, and it's really powerful what you're still doing within the community and the efforts that you're putting in, and it's very much integrated into the communities and community work and um, raising up, holding, and raising up and holding up your voice for the injustice that is going around in this world right now. I feel like there are a lot of things that we should always celebrate about us, about human beings, about our achievements, about our resilience, about things that we change within the world. But then there are also a lot of these areas that you spoke about, whether that be immigrant experience, that be the wars that are happening up around in the world, or whether that be just the simple topic of wanting to be in your own identity. Um,
Yes.
and I'm really happy that people like you exist because you folks give us hope. You
But people like you exist and work with our kids. Thank you so much.
Of course. And there is one, before we wrap up, as I know we are close to ending time, but there was one thing that you wrote in your book that caught my attention a lot. It was a line which stated, uh, go through the pain, grieve, and let it teach you. Go through it and learn what you need to know. How would you define this? What were your thoughts when you were writing this? Because it really touched my heart when I read it.
Well, it was it really capsulized my experience in counseling, but in writing the book, is realizing that in going through it and in facing and going through it, we can come out on the other side, as if it was only two-sided. Anyway, we can come out of it as stronger and more resilient, to use that term. Um, and it's really I've never one of the things that has been a problem for me is that I would follow in my mother's footsteps, I guess, and repress some of the stuff that's so painful. It's not just my mom, but I think it's a human tendency to suppress or repress um, things that are painful. And if we can go through the pain, learn from it, and and get help if we need to, get someone to help us listen to it and grow and learn from it, then we can be more whole and more helpful people.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Okay.
I'll put on all your links within the description of the video so that people can look at your website and order the book as well. As closing thoughts, how do you hope that your book and your work impacts readers or listeners who might be going through similar struggles that you've gone through?
I want people to hang in, um, and have hope that things can get better. Hang in so that you don't have to hang it up, would be another way to put it. Um, because there were a couple of times when I've been tempted to hang things up myself, and the idea that things can be better and that I can have a peace, I can have a I can be a part of making it better for
Mhm.
myself and for others,
That's that's that's
and,
really
and to get
powerful.
help and to get help when we need it.
Yeah, no, that's very powerful because as I tell everyone, people that I work with, whether those be kids or whether those be families, I always tell them, like, I know you're going through a difficult part of your life. I know you're going through a struggle, but just hang in there.
Yeah,
And this is like a storm that will pass through. And once that storm passes through, there will be sunlight. There will be things that you will appreciate about life. But in this moment, it's a huge. You're just in the middle of a storm. So just hang in there. Trust yourself because as human beings, we are very adaptable. We have the tendency to achieve anything and everything that we set up our mind to. So, really grateful for the conversation we had today. Your journey completely speaks about it in volumes, about being resilient, about being always curious about things that you want to do, and never settling down on things. So I really appreciate you coming in today, and love to have another chat, another communication, and go in some much more deeper topics. But I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Ben, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Z. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Pleasure meeting you and talking with you. Thanks. Best wishes to you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.